The Tarot. Tarot cards probably came to Europe in the 1300s from the Mamluk court of Egypt and Turkey. Known as trifoni or charoko, they were popular playing cards decorated simply or elaborately with pictures of birds, gods, Christian imagery, and various court fashions. In the 18th century, Jean-Baptiste Eliot and Antoine Coeur de Gébelin popularized the tarot cards as divination cards. Fascinated by correspondences between astrology, the four humors, and Egyptian mysticism, they published books and cards with upright and reversed meanings similar to the meanings we know today. One of Eliot's more influential books was the Book of Thoth, published under the pseudonym Etela. The Golden Dawn. The divination tarot and the esoteric writings were taken up by members of the Golden Dawn, a group of Victorians fascinated by the occult. The popular Rider-Waite deck, illustrated by Pamela Coleman Smith, was later published in the early 70s by Stuart Kaplan and continues to influence almost every deck since. Another fan of the Book of Thoth and a Golden Dawn member, Aleister Crowley commissioned his own deck, almost equally popular to the Rider-Waite deck. The cards, done by Lady Frida Harris, are in an Art Deco style. The cards were meant to be closer to the original Book of Thoth and Egyptian imagery. Crowley wanted to tie the cards to his own studies of the Hebrew Kabbalah. Ordo Templi Orientis. The European Renaissance saw the rise of Christian herbalists and occultists who freely adapted the teachings of the Kabbalah into the beliefs of Western esotericism. The rise of Hermetic teachings incorporated the Kabbalah in Western magic, where Crowley studied it. The Sephiroth are the 10 emanations of God. Crowley took this map and attached the cards of the major arcana to it. This led to an alphanumeric map of the cards that marks out the Crowley deck. The White Goddess. I was struck by the alphanumeric map when I began to study the Tarot. As a linguist, I had long been fascinated by alphabets and the way in which spoken languages are written down. Whereas Greek used the first letter of a number word to represent that number, Hebrew used the alphabet itself to represent numbers. Most other early number systems were represented by dots, lines, or other marks modified by ease of writing. When I first began to study runes in Ogham, the Celtic tree alphabet, I was struck by how much the glyphs look like number glyphs. Ogham looks very much like a set of 20 glyphs, 4 sets of 5 used for counting. Since most of the early European counting words are from 1 to 20, this makes sense. It also follows that they, like the Hebrews, used these glyphs as their alphabet. Ogham is not arranged in the same way as other alphabets. The Druids who used this glyph system were also fond of substituting words for birds, animals, trees, people, lands, anything at all for the actual letters. What is left of these early alphabets is the Irish alphabet of trees, or the tree Ogham. In this picture, I have tried to match the Ogham glyphs to the other alphabets using a combination of myth, letter, and sound. I am not alone in trying to figure out Ogham and how it relates to other languages. Robert Graves, famous for his poetry and his fiction of classical Rome, wrote a large book called The White Goddess on how Ogham glyphs point to the secret name of God and are tied closely with the earth goddess of the ancients. Although dismissed by academics, this book remains very popular among occultists. Graves arranged the alphabet glyphs around his dolmen, or the directions. This arrangement does not respect the ancient calendar, which began the year in the autumn. Graves goes with the midwinter calendar of our modern times, a calendar that was not used by any other people contemporary with the Celts. There is also still a lively argument over some of the trees and their letters. When I ran into these controversies, I tried to go with pre-Christian dating and phonetics. I began to play with the tarot, dividing the cards into flights of 5 with 2 cards at the beginning and ending. Graves was no linguist, and I had numerous arguments with his attraction to the white goddess being all goddesses. This idea has corrupted later attempts at reconstructing a Druidic and mythologically sound pagan belief system. The logical connection. Another mythographer of the First Order, James George Fraser, also attached himself to an idea. In his recordings of thousands of folklore rites around the world, he saw a pattern emerge from the sacrificial god. Like Graves, he understood the tree, the snake, and the hero as part of a universal ritual of the choosing of the sacred king who would bring back fertility to the land of the fruiting grain through his union with the goddess. Joseph Campbell acknowledged this king rite as the basis for many modern religions of the West that evolved into one god. He saw this story of the sacred king as the true story and called it the hero's journey. Unlike Europeans who knew more of the dark side of this myth, the Americans were enamored of the choosing and rise of the king, not his fall from grace and his sacrifice. The truncated myth became so popular that it became the one plot accepted by Hollywood without question. There are few movies not influenced by the hero's journey. George Lucas followed this map, drawn by Campbell almost exactly in his first movie, Return of the Jedi. The Fourfold Tarot. Here again is a fourfold map. How does this pattern affect the major arcana? I will show you how it influenced me in my design of the pip cards, yet it too allowed me to see a fourfold motif in the major arcana. And again, here is a list of numbers in Hebrew and Roman alphabets, Crowley's astrological signs, and my own placement of the Irish tree alphabet. I've spent a great deal of time with the tree alphabet and the 4 basic myths of the Western way. Even the Fool and World cards seem wide open to interpretation. They still are. Correspondences are an attempt to match one-to-one ideas related by a common theme. Matching one way brings up one illusion, mapping another makes one think of other metaphors. However, I was in doubt. I used my knowledge of linguistics, but tried to stay with the mythological work of Fraser and Graves. The 4 myths are drawn from Joseph Campbell's observations of primitive religions. Northern peoples tended to stay with older shaman myths. Equatorial peoples developed a myth of the apotheosis of a male and female, whose joining was necessary to continue the cycle of farming, seed, plant, fruit, and rot. Campbell's book on the male of this myth became so popular that it overshadowed other myths. Writers derived all kinds of psychological maps from the hero's journey. Popular images of the shadow became prevalent in common culture. It has come to the point where even other myths were aspects of characters in the hero's journey. A book on writing which scripts out the hero's journey plot made me realize that something was overlooked. The serious thing overlooked was that Americans, in their enthusiasm for success, ignored the full hero's journey cycle. But first, a look at the hero's journey. Here is George Lucas's popular movie, Return of the Jedi. You can see here that the white tags represent the call to adventure, and they plunge into the magical world wherein lies the elixir of life that will heal the broken kingdom. Here I have placed the beginning and end cards of the major arcana. Now would be easy for some person to place the other 20 cards around this wheel to make a hero's journey map of the major arcana. It is tempting except for the first 4 cards, the magus, the priestess, the empress, and the emperor. You could put these cards into the world in other places, but for me, they indicated something different. I first kept a circular map Campbell created but added on another circle to represent the hero king's rise and fall in the real world, and his death and return as he is resurrected in his Son. Here is my figure 8 map of the entire myth of the hero. My respect for George Lucas jumped when he decided to tell the full myth, which is depicted in the character of Anakin Skywalker. I have in this picture put in the high points of the full myth, where the hero becomes a king as he takes on more and more burden of the kingdom, becomes a tyrant, and finally so polluted with power politics and evil luck, he sacrifices himself for the sake of his reincarnation in the pure sun. I have some other videos about the hero's journey, plot, and writing, and much more, but let us go on to the major arcana. Earth. The god of fertility and earth is not made of earth, but fertilizes the earth. This god usually appears as a god of light, strength, controlling beasts, and daring adventure with the help of others. He is fractured into so many gods that Joseph Campbell called him the hero of 1,000 faces. I put my first group of 5 cards into the figure 8 map with the beginning and end cards as the Fool and the World. If you see the small break in this map, you will see that we go across, then down, counterclockwise into the magical world, then rise up and go clockwise into the real world, and then fall. The cycle I chose for the hero begins with fortune. The fool in this story is lucky. Fate takes him through the threshold to the magical world where, usually on a horse or a vehicle, he has adventures, returns with the elixir to become the emperor, is sacrificed at midwinter, and then reincarnated as the rising sun. This pattern is repeated in my Tarot of Tales of Aniath deck, where the major arcana is tied to the group of main players from Earth, and again in the nature decks, where the cards are represented in a more druidic way acceptable to pagans. I will go into much more detail in the next videos on each story archetype and the meanings of the cards. Air. The shaman story is almost as popular in its truncated form as the hero's. It is the opposite story. A magical being is called into the real world to help the oppressed and defeats enemies using guile rather than brawn. The shaman shows up around the world in many forms, often as a bird or a wily animal, or as an old man or a mortuary guard. The popular image is of a private eye. Rather than being helped, the trickster shaman takes on forms often horrifying or incomprehensible. The most famous of this myth aspect are the gods Odin and Hermes, the witch Baba Yaga, and the fictional character Sherlock Holmes. The trickster is single, girlfriends usually die, an underdog, often humorous or ridiculous, always operating at lightning speed and often flying in the company of birds or appearing as death. This image depicts a reverse journey. The 8 is a Widdershins figure where the first loop goes up into the ordinary world. The door between worlds is opened by a death. The death is righted or avenged by the actions of the magus. For his actions, he is sent back to the other world, where he manifests as a trickster god known to Christians as the devil. His kingdom is overthrown, and he is cast out to become the wandering teacher hermit. Again, this is repeated with appropriate players from my book series, The Tales of Aniath, in the Aniath deck. The image of death shows up as the gate between worlds, and the tower still draws the lightning strike. In the animal decks, I was able to use deeper imagery from European folklore to represent the aspects of tales that would fit and satisfy the Western mind. Water. Since ancient times, goddesses ruled lakes, rivers, and the sea. Deposed by Poseidon in the sea, most lakes were still inhabited by beautiful goddesses. They persist today in mermaid images, yet it is popular still for women to bathe and birth in water. Water is equated with blood and rivers and with veins. Although there are plenty of men who practice water magic, This is the only province in Ireland ruled by women. This province is also the province of beauty, children, youth, and music. The female models are spirals rather than figure eights. Because we read left to right, the bride's spiral is left-handed. You see a similar pattern of departure into the magical world full of ordeals, tests, and adventures. She rises back into the real world and then falls back to the borderland. You could think of this as a wave going back and forth to balance out the worlds. Here, the major Arcana cards to express this story. The call is dominated by the Hierophant, or the desire or command to have a child in the sacred marriage with the right father who will protect the family. This part of the story is so popular that it has become shunned and mocked by feminists. Yet the primal urge to procreate attracts lovers to these stories. It is much more than a love story, for a bride must show herself to be strong enough to bear the adult responsibility. Here, tasks, usually 3, were altered to fit the mores of each culture and generation. The true tests were always tests of water, purity, clarity, and flow. Rising back in the real world, she becomes the empress, but also the powered, jealous harridan who is threatened by her own children. Often she is a wronged queen or an evil stepmother. Justice uncovers her crime and tries to kill her, strips her from the family throne. She becomes compassion or temperance, knowing that balance must be preserved for the wave to nourish life. My own decks reflect this story. Each player takes on aspects of mythological archetypes and positions in each myth. Here, the image of the Maiden of Flowers is followed by the lovers, who are 2 people who change genders. The Empress is a power-mad queen desperate to save her people, and justice is both objective and unfair. In the animal decks, the myth and folklore aspects are brought forth to create a deck more deeply satisfying to European mythology. Fire. This story, myth, and consequential confusion is almost tragic. The ignorance of mythographers confused Wiccans and pagans, as many of the Golden Dawn insisted that all goddesses were ultimately the same white goddess. Yet fractured images remain with the fractured stories of this male-female god that has no gender, no age, and no relationship to the king and queen of fertility, yet is responsible for the creation of the stars. In Hebrew, she was the Word. For the Greeks, she was both Athena and Hephaestus, lame and created not by birth but by another god. She carries with her the flame of the Vestals and of the smiths, dwarves, cripples, or those tormented for their stealing of fire. Loki was a thief who was not of Asgard, and his punishment was dire as that of Prometheus. In our map, the story of fire is the reverse of the bride's story. The story is dominated by time, and time for humans has always been the moon. The moon also rules the tides, so this motif is common to both water and fire magic. The witch leaves the magical world on a timed journey to bring balance to the world or to heal something before time runs out. Her adventures are many and usually involve God-given talents, whether seen as theft of the god, a compensation for a physical defect, or the gain of an age or some miracle talent she rises to the world. The only popular story is her fall from grace. People love to see great talent brought low by physical problems. She then becomes the guardian of the universe, or the keystone, or the weapon, and is often enslaved by the ruler of the dark lands. Hers is the ultimate destruction, or the cataclysm that wipes clear the slate to make way for a new world. She then pours out the new world in hope for something better. In Tales of Anya, the magical world lies in the creation of a high priestess. In her various aspects, she and her companions of fire and talent ride to the ultimate destruction. However, death is not death and becomes instead a new world. The animal decks reflect this story, archetype in them images of the different trees, animals, or powers associated with destruction, creation, time, and talent.